The night was still, yet electric. It hummed in the air around her as Tasha stood at the edge of the grand balcony, the twinkling lights of Chicago's skyline stretching out before her. The city buzzed, alive with energy, but in that moment, Tasha felt detached, like a ghost watching it all happen. The music from the party inside thumped, but it didn't reach her. Not really. She could feel the beat in her chest, but it was muffled, as though the whole world was too far away. Her heels clicked on the stone floor as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, scanning the crowd. She wasn't sure if she was waiting for something or someone, but she couldn't deny the feeling creeping up her spine. She'd been waiting for this moment her entire life, a moment where she was seen, not just as David's quiet girlfriend, not just the woman who stood in the background, but as someone who belonged, someone who mattered. But as she glanced over at him, David was nowhere near her. She could see him, just at the edge of the crowd, surrounded by his colleagues, his friends, the people he had always chosen over her. She knew he didn't see her this way, not really. To him, she was just a private affair, a secret kept safe behind closed doors. And it stung. It stung more than she wanted to admit. In the beginning, she didn't mind. She had never asked for the spotlight, never craved it the way others did. She wasn't interested in fame or validation. She simply wanted to be with him. But over the years, it became clear. He didn't need her beside him, at least not in public. When his name appeared on the guest lists for grand charity events, when he was photographed at the fanciest restaurants or the most exclusive venues, she was never beside him. Not in front of the cameras, not in front of the world. He had kept her hidden, a well-kept secret that only his closest friends knew about. And as time passed, Tasha became something she never imagined, a shadow. She tried to convince herself it was enough. He was the love of her life, the one she believed in, the one who made her feel seen, if only for brief, stolen moments. She clung to those moments, savoring them like fragile jewels. Tonight was different. There was a growing tension in her chest, an ache that wouldn't subside. The party around her continued in its grandeur, but her place was at the edges, watching from the outside. She was the girl with no name, standing behind him as if she were invisible, just a backdrop to his success. It had never been her dream to be on billboards or in the spotlight, but she had always imagined something more than this quiet invisibility. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down to see a message from her best friend. "Elaine, are you coming back inside? Everyone's talking about David's engagement." Tasha's heart skipped. She had known about it for weeks now. David's engagement to Claire, the woman he had been dating openly for the past 6 months. It wasn't a surprise, not really. But the pain hit her again, a fresh wave of it, washing over her, leaving her raw and exposed. She stared at the message, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it. Engagement. She had never heard that word from David. She was the one he kept hidden. She was the one he only called when the world wasn't watching. And now, Claire was the one getting the rings, the proposal, the attention. Tasha swallowed hard and typed a quick reply. "I'll be inside in a second. Just need some air." She slid the phone back into her clutch and turned to lean against the stone railing. The cool breeze that hit her face didn't do much to calm the storm inside her. She tried to breathe deeply, in and out, but the words echoed in her mind. Engagement. Secret. Her phone buzzed again, and she didn't even need to look to know it was David. The message was brief. "Everything okay out there?" A knot tightened in her stomach. He didn't understand. He never did. How could he? He was the one who had put them in this position, the one who kept her in the shadows, the one who had always been too afraid to let her into his world. Tasha took one more long, deep breath, hoping to push the ache in her chest away. She couldn't stand there forever. She had to face him, had to pretend everything was fine. As usual. Just as she turned to go back inside, the doors opened, and David stepped out onto the balcony, a glass of whiskey in hand. His eyes lit up when he saw her, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Hey, Tasha," he said, his voice warm but distant. He always greeted her with that same tenderness, as though he truly cared, as though he could erase everything else with a smile. "Hey," she replied quietly, not sure what to say. She wanted to tell him how she felt, how much it hurt to be kept in the shadows, how she couldn't keep pretending. But the words stuck in her throat. It wasn't the time, not here, not in front of everyone, not with the world watching. He took a sip of his drink, and the silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "You okay?" he asked again, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for some sign of distress. He was so good at pretending, so good at looking like he cared when it mattered most. Tasha nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. But it wasn't the truth either. David placed a hand on her arm, his touch warm but fleeting. "Come on, let's go back inside. They're waiting for us." Tasha didn't move. She stood there, looking at him, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside her. The woman he had kept hidden for so long. The one he never wanted to show off. She couldn't stay in the dark anymore. She wasn't just his secret to keep. As he turned to walk back inside, Tasha's gaze followed him, watching as he slipped back into the world he had created. The world that didn't include her, at least not in the way she wanted. She took another breath, steadying herself. She would stay in the shadows no longer. The time for pretending was over. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. The wind had shifted by the time Tasha entered the room again, but it couldn't clear the heaviness in her chest. The city's lights still glowed brightly outside, yet her world inside the lavish apartment felt dim, as though every step she took left a shadow behind her. The laughter and clinking glasses faded into the background, a dull hum that barely registered as she moved through the crowd. David was still talking to his friends, standing near the bar with a glass in his hand, his laughter cutting through the air like he hadn't just torn her heart apart. The entire evening felt surreal, like she was watching a movie where someone else was playing her part. Her hands clenched at her sides, the soft fabric of her dress a contrast to the tightness in her chest. She didn't want to make a scene. She couldn't. No, that was never her way. Her existence had been built on quiet moments, unnoticed by the world. That was the lie she told herself, though. The truth was, she had always craved more. More than just being tucked away behind David's smile. More than the secret phone calls and quiet dinners when no one was looking. Tasha forced herself to take another step forward, to mingle as though everything was fine. She exchanged pleasantries with a few people she didn't know and didn't care to. Each word felt hollow, slipping through her lips with a rehearsed ease. She was used to this role. Tasha, the quiet observer, the one who didn't demand attention, who waited patiently in the background for things to change. But that night, something had shifted. "Hey, Tasha!" Elaine's voice broke through the noise, and Tasha's eyes landed on her best friend as she pushed her way through the crowd. Elaine had always been a light in the darkness, her laughter infectious, her confidence undeniable. But tonight, Tasha could see the concern in her eyes. It was hard to ignore. "What's going on with you?" Elaine asked, leaning in close as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. Tasha forced a smile, the one that had worked for so long, the one that kept her hidden from the truth of her own feelings. "Nothing, just a little tired, I guess." Elaine didn't buy it. "Don't do that. I know something's up." She paused, glancing over at David. "You're really okay with this? With him?" Tasha swallowed hard. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, but hearing it from Elaine, the one person who had always stood by her, the one who had encouraged her to stand up for herself when everyone else treated her like a shadow, it stung in a way that only the truth could. "Yeah, I'm fine," Tasha said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I guess I just don't have much of a choice, right?" Elaine's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only concern. "You don't have to keep doing this for him. You've been invisible for so long. Are you okay with that?" Tasha's throat tightened, and she could feel the tears pushing at the back of her eyes. She wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand an answer from David. But what good would it do? She had spent too many years letting her love for him hold her captive, a prisoner to his whims. Now, all she had left was the quiet ache of realizing that she wasn't enough to be seen in his world. "I thought I was," Tasha whispered. "But I guess I was wrong." Elaine didn't say anything else, but she placed a hand on Tasha's arm, offering silent support. The moment passed, and Tasha took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. She had to move forward. She had to keep going, keep pretending. But as she turned back toward David, she saw it. The thing she had been avoiding, the thing she had never wanted to believe. There, across the room, Claire stood beside him. Her arm looped through David's. Her face lit up with a smile that was as bright and shining as the spotlight that seemed to follow her everywhere. The scene was perfect. Too perfect. Tasha's stomach twisted, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Claire was beautiful, of course, but it wasn't just that. It was the ease with which she fit into David's world. The way she belonged in the places Tasha had always been kept out of. The way she was the one David wanted the world to see. And in that moment, the truth hit Tasha like a slap. He had never loved her the way he loved Claire. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt like she might crumble right there on the spot. But she couldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. Elaine's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Tasha, you need to talk to him. You deserve more than this." Tasha shook her head, blinking away the tears that had threatened to fall. "No, it's fine. I'm fine." She turned quickly, walking toward the exit. "I need some air." Elaine's protest was lost in the noise behind her as Tasha stepped into the hallway, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. The cool air of the hallway hit her face, but it didn't ease the burn in her chest. She pressed her hand to the wall, closing her eyes as the tears she had held back finally fell, unbidden. For so long, she had convinced herself that love was enough, that loyalty and devotion would carry her through, that her quiet strength would somehow make up for being pushed aside. But tonight, standing on the edge of his world, she saw it for what it truly was. A story she was never meant to be a part of. She wasn't just an outsider. She was the afterthought, the girl who had been nothing more than a footnote in David's life. And now, as he moved on with someone else, someone he could show off, someone who fit into his life like a perfect puzzle piece, Tasha felt the truth sink deep into her bones. She had been nothing more than a distraction, a secret he had never planned to share. She wiped her eyes, breathing through the pain. She was done. Done with waiting for a love that wasn't hers. Done with being invisible. Done with pretending to be okay when her heart was breaking into a million pieces. But as she stood there, she realized something else too. She wasn't going to let this break her. She wasn't going to shrink back into the shadows again. The world had forgotten her, but she was going to remind them all who she was. And no matter what it took, she would rise. She would find her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. David's world had never been hers to begin with, and now she was going to take what was rightfully hers. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. The next few days felt like a blur of motion, as though the world had slowed around her while she remained locked in a fast-paced storm. The city of Chicago seemed brighter, the colors more vivid, and yet, none of it seemed to matter. David's engagement announcement had come as no surprise, but the realization of how little she truly mattered in his life still struck like a cold, uninvited wind. Tasha hadn't seen David since the party. He'd sent a few texts, asking if she was okay, if they could talk. But there was nothing to say. What was there left to say when the truth had already been laid bare? She didn't respond. She couldn't. The truth had settled too deeply into her chest, and she wasn't about to ignore it now. Instead, she immersed herself in the silence, choosing not to engage with the man who had kept her a secret for so long. The days that followed were filled with long hours at her new freelance photography job. Tasha had always been good with a camera, but until recently, she had never allowed herself to consider it as a career. Photography had always been a passion, a quiet escape from her real life. She had spent years capturing moments, just for herself, just to preserve the beauty of the world in its simplest, most unnoticed forms. But now it was her escape. It was her way of reclaiming her life, her identity, and her strength. Her focus sharpened as she stepped into the world of professional photography. She knew the ins and outs of the industry from her years of working as a personal assistant to some of Chicago's top photographers. But the moment she picked up her camera and stepped behind the lens, she knew things would be different this time. Her first gig was small, a corporate event at one of the city's largest venues. The work was straightforward enough, but it was different. She wasn't just the woman behind the scenes anymore. She was the one in control of the shots, the one who got to decide which moments were preserved. The thrill of it hit her immediately. For the first time in ages, Tasha felt alive. The nervous energy that had previously built in her chest when she was around David, the quiet tension of never truly being seen, began to melt away. She was the one people were looking to now, not because she was hidden, but because she had something to offer. And that, in itself, was enough. As the event went on, she snapped pictures of executives shaking hands, attendees laughing and exchanging business cards, the light bouncing off the sleek, polished floors of the event hall. The clicks of her camera became her mantra, each shot an affirmation that she was moving forward. She wasn't holding on to the past anymore. She wasn't someone's secret. She was Tasha Montgomery, and she had a voice. The event ended well into the evening, and as she packed up her gear and left the venue, her phone buzzed again. It was David. "I know you're upset, but can we talk? We need to clear this up." Tasha stared at the screen for a long moment. She could feel her pulse quicken. It would have been so easy to respond. It would have been so easy to slip back into the comfort of his world. But the ache in her chest was still there, and it would take more than a few words to erase what he had done. She put the phone back in her bag and stepped into the cool night air, letting the breeze wash over her. She couldn't go back. She wasn't the same woman who had quietly waited in the shadows anymore. She was ready for more. And David? David was a chapter she was done reading. The following week, Tasha received a call from a local marketing agency that had seen her work. They wanted to hire her for a new ad campaign for a luxury fashion brand, one of the biggest names in the industry. The excitement and disbelief hit her all at once. She had only been freelancing for a month, but already she was getting calls. Real calls. Not just from acquaintances or small-time clients, but from people who could see her potential. Her first instinct was to decline. After all, she wasn't ready for this. She hadn't even proven herself yet. But then she remembered the emptiness that had taken root in her chest for so many years. She wasn't going to hide anymore. Not from herself and not from the world. She took the job. The next few days were a whirlwind. She threw herself into the work, more determined than ever to prove that she belonged in this space. Her new clients were professional and gracious, and they had a clear vision for the campaign. As she watched the models, the photographers, and the designers collaborate, she began to understand something crucial. Her perspective had always been valid. She had seen the world through a different lens than most, and that was powerful. As the photo shoots continued, Tasha's confidence grew. She found herself pushing the boundaries, encouraging the models to show more of themselves, more of their raw, unpolished truths. The result was incredible. Her work was powerful, moving, and authentic. By the end of the campaign, her images were all over the brand's social media, gracing billboards in major cities. Her name was beginning to spread, slowly but surely. She wasn't just another photographer anymore. She was the one people were turning to. But even as her success grew, there was always a part of her that couldn't quite shake the lingering effects of David's betrayal. It wasn't that she wanted to go back to him. No, she had moved on from that. It was more the quiet sting of knowing she had been nothing more than an afterthought in his life. Weeks later, as Tasha stood in her new apartment overlooking the skyline of Chicago, she saw a familiar face on the cover of a high-end magazine. David, with Claire. Their engagement plastered across the pages for all the world to see. The image was a reminder, but it wasn't the blow she thought it would be. It didn't hurt the way it once would have. Tasha looked at her reflection in the window and smiled. She was still here, still standing, still rising. The phone buzzed again, this time a call from her agent. "Tasha, I have a big one for you," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "A chance to shoot a cover for Vogue. They're interested in you specifically." Tasha stood there for a moment, the city beneath her feet, the world at her fingertips. She could hear her heartbeat, steady and strong, echoing in her ears. This was it. She had come a long way from being the invisible woman who stood in the shadows. She wasn't invisible anymore. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady with confidence. "If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels." Tasha hadn't expected the call. How could she have? Her mind was still wrapped up in the whirlwind of her recent projects. Her freelance work that was finally beginning to take shadows for so long. Yet, despite the turmoil, there was a fire inside her now. A fire that had started small but was steadily growing into something undeniable. The call came one Thursday afternoon, her phone buzzing with a number she didn't recognize. At first, she hesitated. Calls from numbers she didn't know rarely meant anything good. But when she saw the email address tied to the number, something that hinted at high-end fashion, her curiosity won out. She picked up the phone. "Hello. Hi, is this Tasha Montgomery?" The voice on the other end asked, its tone calm but sharp, as if the person had done this 1,000 times before. "Speaking. This is Natalie from Lux World Promotions. We saw your work on the campaign for Harper's Bazaar, and we're very impressed. We'd love for you to collaborate with us on an upcoming ad campaign for Prada. We're looking for someone with a fresh perspective, someone who understands both beauty and authenticity." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Prada. She had never even dreamed of working with a brand of that caliber. Her mind raced for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. "No, don't get ahead of yourself. Focus. You've earned this. That's incredible. Thank you for considering me," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "We've already seen what you can do, Tasha. Your photographs, they're real, raw, and powerful. That's exactly what Prada wants. We'd like to move forward with you for the shoot next month. Can we count on you?" She wanted to shout, to express her disbelief, but she didn't. She just said, "Yes, absolutely. I'm in." As the conversation ended, Tasha stood there for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. Prada. She had made it, or at least she was about to. The world she'd been stepping into wasn't just a space she was visiting. It was her space now. The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and preparation. The team at Lux World Promotions worked with Tasha closely, planning every detail of the shoot for Prada. From styling to location scouting, they trusted her creative vision. She was no longer the woman standing behind someone else's success. She was leading the charge, creating the imagery that would define a campaign. Her mind, still fresh with the taste of victory, worked overtime as she conceptualized the shots. She knew the exact vibe they wanted to capture. Strong, elegant, unshakable. She wanted to showcase not just the clothes, but the strength of the people wearing them. The images had to speak to more than just the fabric. They had to speak to the spirit of the person behind them. The shoot was set in an industrial loft in downtown Chicago, the rawness of the space juxtaposed with the sleekness of the Prada pieces. Tasha had spent days organizing the set, ensuring the lighting was just right, that each model felt confident and free, and that every shot told a story. She wasn't just snapping pictures. She was creating a narrative, a vision. When the day of the shoot arrived, Tasha stood at the center of it all, quietly overseeing every detail. The models, some fresh faces, others seasoned veterans, looked to her for direction, and she gave it without hesitation. Her confidence had grown so much in the last few months, it was almost unrecognizable. There was a calmness in her now, a certainty that hadn't existed before. She knew who she was, and she knew what she was capable of. The models strutted across the set, their poses sharp and bold, their eyes full of determination. Tasha moved around them, capturing every angle with precision. The camera felt like an extension of herself, the click of the shutter synchronizing with the beat of her heart. She wasn't just capturing moments anymore. She was crafting them. This was her moment, her power. As the shoot wrapped up, Tasha stood back, watching the team pack up. The ad would go live in a few weeks, but Tasha knew that this was only the beginning. The work she had done here wasn't just going to be remembered for its beauty. It was going to be remembered for its raw power. And she was the one who had created it. It wasn't until later that night, after the shoot had ended and she was sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing the images from the day, that the full weight of what she had just accomplished hit her. Prada, the Prada campaign. It was a moment that would change everything for her. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen. Another text from Elaine. "Hey, you made it. Prada. That's huge. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you had it in you." Tasha smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. Elaine had always believed in her, even when she hadn't. Even when Tasha couldn't see it herself. She replied quickly, "Thanks. Couldn't have done it without your support." Elaine's response was immediate. "We've got to celebrate. How about dinner tomorrow night?" Tasha sat back in her chair, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The old Tasha, the woman who had quietly stood in the shadows, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone unafraid of the light, someone who had risen from the ashes of a broken heart to claim her place in the world. She wasn't just another photographer anymore. She was a force, and nothing, not even David, could take that away from her. The next morning, the email came. It was from Luxworld Promotions. The subject line read, "Prada ad campaign, results and next steps." Tasha opened the email slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she clicked the attachment. There it was, a full-page ad featuring one of her photos. The model was striking a confident pose, wearing a high-fashion suit, her eyes fierce and unyielding. The caption below read, "Power in every step. Prada." Tasha blinked, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just the photo that took her breath away. It was the realization that this was the moment her life had shifted forever. She had made it. She was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. It was early morning when Tasha sat at her kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting warm rays across the room. But inside, the air felt heavy. She had been awake for hours, going over the shots from her Prada campaign one last time. The ad would go live in just a few days, and the pressure was mounting. Tasha had always been a perfectionist. She prided herself on being meticulous, on capturing the most authentic moments, but this was different. She had made it. She had stepped into the light, into the very world she had once only dreamed of. But now that she was here, there was a new fear creeping in. A fear that, no matter how hard she tried, she wouldn't be able to hold on to it. What if it was all a fluke? What if people saw through her? What if she wasn't really the photographer she thought she was, but simply a lucky woman with a few good shots? Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked through the images again. She could see the beauty in them, but she also saw the flaws. The one shot where the light had been just a little too harsh. The other where the model's pose was slightly off. It was as if she couldn't stop seeing imperfections. And the longer she stared, the more those imperfections seemed to grow, becoming giants in her mind. The door to her apartment opened, and Elaine stepped inside, her familiar presence filling the space with warmth. She was always early, always eager to check in on Tasha. She noticed the look on her friend's face immediately, the distant, worried expression that Tasha had worn since her first successful campaign. The one that had replaced the spark in her eyes. Elaine set down her bag and walked over to the table, peering at the laptop screen. "You're still looking at those?" she asked, her tone gentle but knowing. Tasha sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I can't stop. I keep seeing the flaws. They're everywhere. What if it's not good enough? What if they realize that I'm just not as good as they think I am?" Elaine pulled out the chair next to Tasha and sat down. She didn't need to say anything at first. She just placed a hand on Tasha's shoulder, a quiet gesture of reassurance. They had been through a lot together, and Elaine knew exactly what was going through her mind. Tasha had spent years hiding, staying in the background, and now that she was finally in the spotlight, she was struggling to believe she deserved to be there. "I think I'm just afraid," Tasha whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I mess up? What if this is all a mistake?" Elaine let out a small, understanding chuckle. "You're scared? Tasha, you've been running your whole life, dodging the shadows, making sure no one sees you. But you stepped into the light and you took it by storm. Don't let a little doubt take that away from you." Tasha looked over at Elaine, the weight of the words sinking in. She was right, of course. She had been hiding for so long, afraid of rejection, afraid of not being good enough. But now she had proven herself. She had created something beautiful, something that was uniquely hers. And yet, here she was, letting fear steal her joy. "I didn't think it would be like this," Tasha said, a small laugh escaping her lips. "I thought when I finally got this chance I would feel complete, like everything I've worked for would finally make sense." Elaine shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. "Tasha, you're not incomplete. You never were. You've always had this strength inside you. You've always had what it takes. It's just that now you're letting the world see it. But you've been this woman all along." Tasha swallowed hard, the tears threatening to surface once more. The truth of Elaine's words hit her like a flood. She had spent so much time running from the truth of her own worth, from the fear of what would happen if she truly let herself believe in her own power. She had convinced herself that success was something that could slip through her fingers, something that wasn't meant for women like her. But here she was, staring it in the face, and she couldn't keep running anymore. "You're right," Tasha said quietly, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I've been hiding. I've been holding back. But I don't need to anymore." Elaine smiled, her eyes full of pride. "That's the Tasha I know. Now, let's get back to work." The next few days were a whirlwind. Tasha felt the surge of confidence return to her. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just about the external validation she had received. It was about her own belief in herself. She knew she had the talent, the eye, and the passion. She just had to trust that she was worthy of it all. She dove headfirst into her next project, a corporate shoot for a new high-end clothing line. The models were fierce and elegant, and Tasha channeled everything she had learned into the photo shoot. She pushed herself further than she ever had before, experimenting with new techniques, new angles, and new lighting. Every click of the camera was a declaration. She was no longer holding back. She was no longer afraid to show the world who she was. By the end of the shoot, the images were exactly what she had envisioned: powerful, bold, and unapologetically beautiful. As she packed up her equipment, she couldn't help but smile. The fear, the doubt, it had melted away. She was doing it. She was creating work that mattered. The next few days were filled with excitement as the Prada campaign went live. Tasha sat in her apartment, scrolling through her phone as the images began to flood the internet. The campaign was everywhere, on billboards in Times Square, on social media feeds, in fashion magazines. It was surreal. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was as if she had stepped into someone else's life, someone who had it all figured out. But it wasn't someone else's life, it was hers. As the days went on, Tasha's work continued to gain attention. New clients reached out, eager to book her for their campaigns. Her Instagram followers skyrocketed, and industry leaders took notice. She was no longer the woman behind the scenes. She was the one people were looking to. She was the one creating the magic. But even with all the success, Tasha never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the woman who had been invisible, the one who had doubted herself and let fear hold her back. She used that woman as fuel, reminding herself every day that she had earned her place here. No one had given it to her. She had taken it. Late one evening, Tasha sat at her kitchen table again, this time with a glass of wine in hand. The world outside her window was quiet, the streets of Chicago still and calm. She looked at the photos that had taken over her Instagram, at the comments pouring in from strangers who admired her work. But what really caught her eye was the message from Elaine. "You did it, Tasha. You're a star. But never forget, you've always been the star. Now the world can see it too." Tasha took a deep breath and smiled. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was a force, and she was just getting started. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. Tasha stood in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of disbelief and awe. It had been 3 months since she had signed that contract with Prada. 3 months since the world had started seeing her the way she had always hoped. No longer a background figure, but the one in control. And yet, as she watched herself adjust her dress, something about it still felt surreal. The soft click of her phone on the counter drew her attention. She grabbed it quickly, the nerves she thought she had conquered creeping back into her chest. It was an email from her agent, Natalie. "Tasha, I know you're going to be busy, but we need to talk. Big opportunity coming your way. I'll call you in the morning." She stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing with possibilities. Another campaign? A magazine feature? Could it be a bigger brand? A new collaboration? The doorbell rang, pulling her back to reality. She checked the clock on the wall. It was late, too late for a delivery, but curiosity nudged her to the door anyway. She opened it slowly, and there, standing on her doorstep, was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and his expression was serious, almost too serious. "Can I help you?" Tasha asked, her voice tinged with wariness. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the man said, his voice firm but polite. "But I've been sent to speak with Tasha Montgomery, the photographer." "That's me," she said, still not sure what to make of the situation. "I'm Michael Foster. I represent Glamour magazine." His words hung in the air, and Tasha felt her stomach tighten. Glamour magazine. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was this the call she'd been waiting for? Michael stepped forward, handing her a thick folder, his expression unreadable. "We'd like to offer you an exclusive feature. You're being considered for our Photographer of the Year award, and we'd like to discuss the details of your profile." Tasha blinked, her hands suddenly clammy as she took the folder from him. Photographer of the Year? Her? Was he confused? Did he mean to be talking to someone else? Her mind began to race as she tried to process his words, the disbelief creeping back in. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You're looking for someone else. I'm just a freelance photographer. I'm still building my career." Michael's brows furrowed, and he glanced at the folder again, his voice laced with confusion. "Are you not Tasha Montgomery, the photographer who shot the Prada campaign?" "I am, but you're listed as the photographer behind some of the most iconic shoots of the year. The Harper's Bazaar shoot, Vogue's fashion editorial, and, of course, Prada's latest campaign," he continued, his voice unwavering. "Tasha, you're exactly who we want." Tasha felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her breath caught in her throat. She was certain there had been some mistake, but as she stood there, her fingers gripping the folder, something inside her told her that this moment, this feeling of being mistaken for someone else, was exactly the push she needed. She was no longer the woman living in the shadows. She wasn't invisible anymore. "I'm Tasha Montgomery," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But there's no way you could have been looking for me. I'm not what you think I am." Michael looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for the truth. Then he shook his head, as if realizing something. "I'm sorry for the confusion. We've been following your work for months. You've become one of the most sought-after photographers in the industry. You're more than ready for this." "I'm not sure what to say," Tasha replied, feeling a wave of heat rise in her chest. "But I'll do it. I'm in. Let's talk about the feature." The next few hours felt like a blur as she sat with Michael, going over the details of the feature and the potential recognition that could come with it. It was a surreal experience. Everything that had seemed like a distant dream just a few months ago now felt as if it was happening too fast. But it wasn't too fast. She had earned this. She had worked for this moment. The following week, the Glamour magazine shoot began. Tasha was assigned to capture the stories of rising stars, artists, entrepreneurs, and activists, people who had made it against all odds, much like her. The entire shoot was a tribute to the power of perseverance, to the strength of those who refused to be overlooked, who refused to stay in the shadows. As she snapped photos of the first subject, a young activist from Brooklyn named Zoe, Tasha felt a new kind of connection to her work. She was no longer just photographing beautiful people in beautiful clothes. She was telling the story of struggle, strength, and survival. She was capturing the human spirit. And for the first time in a long time, she could see that same spirit in herself. Zoe stood in front of the backdrop, her hands clenched at her sides as she stared fiercely into the camera. "I've been underestimated my entire life," she said, her voice steady and proud. "But I'm here to change the world, not just be a part of it." Tasha clicked the shutter, her heart swelling with pride. She understood Zoe in a way she hadn't expected. For so long, Tasha had been underestimated. She had allowed herself to be invisible in David's world. But now, she was in control of her own narrative. No one could erase her anymore. The photo shoot continued, with more incredible subjects who shared their stories of perseverance and transformation. Tasha's camera clicked steadily, capturing their pain, their strength, and their triumphs. She was no longer just a woman hiding behind a lens. She was the one telling the story. By the end of the shoot, Tasha was exhausted but fulfilled. The Glamour feature would be out in a month, and it would showcase the incredible people she had photographed. But it was also her story. She wasn't just the photographer anymore. She was a part of the narrative. The next few weeks were filled with anticipation as the magazine went to print. Tasha found herself inundated with messages and calls from people she had only ever dreamed of working with. Invitations to private ev. Afraid to step into the light? Why had she allowed herself to stay in the background for so long? The fear that had once kept her hiding in the shadows was slowly being replaced by a sense of confidence and clarity. She didn't need to be someone else's secret anymore. She had always been the star of her own story. She just needed to let the world see it. Then, the Glamour magazine issue hit the shelves. Tasha had seen the digital version online, but there was something different about holding the physical copy in her hands. She stared at the cover, her face taking up the entire page, her work shining through in the crisp, stunning images. It wasn't just her photography on display. It was her, the real Tasha Montgomery, finally stepping into the light. It was at that moment, as she sat in her apartment, flipping through the pages of the magazine, that it hit her. She had done it. She had gone from being a forgotten shadow to the person everyone was talking about. She had come full circle. The world might have made a mistake in thinking she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't ready. But now the world knew who she was. And Tasha Montgomery was no longer afraid to take up space. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. The buzz in the photography world was undeniable. Tasha's name was everywhere. On fashion blogs, in industry circles, and even in whispers at parties and events she had never dreamed of attending. Her work for Prada had catapulted her into a level of success she had once only imagined. The Glamour magazine feature had only solidified her standing. But with success came an unexpected consequence. Scrutiny. It wasn't just admiration that came with the new attention. There was criticism too, especially from the people who had once doubted her. The same industry insiders who had told her she wasn't ready, that she needed more time to prove herself, were now coming for her, claiming that her rise had been too fast, too visible. There were articles published with sharp critiques of her work. Many focused on how she didn't fit the mold. Some questioned whether her success was a result of a single lucky shot. Tasha read them all. She could feel the weight of the words even before she clicked on the articles. The barbs hidden behind polite phrases like, too experimental for mainstream tastes, or lacking the sophistication of seasoned photographers. The world she had stepped into wasn't a smooth path of applause. It was rough, jagged, and full of people who tried to undermine her success with backhanded compliments and veiled jealousy. There were whispers behind closed doors, with people dismissing her as a flash in the pan. It was hard to ignore, hard to not let it shake her. And then, of course, there was David. The man who had kept her hidden in the shadows for years, only to watch her emerge into the very world he had tried to keep her out of. He had always believed that she was just someone he could keep in the background. But now, with her name out there, on billboards and in magazines, David had no choice but to see her as the force she had become. He reached out, of course. As soon as he saw the glamour issue, his messages came flooding in. "Tasha, we need to talk. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I made a mistake. Let's fix this." She never responded. She didn't need to. The same man who had dismissed her for so long now wanted to be a part of her success. But it was too late. Tasha didn't need David's validation anymore. She didn't need anyone's approval. Still, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel the sting of his rejection. It was a quiet ache, the kind that lingered in the back of her mind when she was alone at night, sitting in her apartment, reflecting on how far she had come. She had never wanted this fame, this attention. She had wanted his love, his respect. But now, she realized, the respect she had been craving could only come from one person: herself. Tasha knew she had to keep moving forward, no matter what anyone said. But the voices, the criticisms were getting louder. She felt them when she walked into galleries where her work was being displayed. She heard them when she saw familiar faces whispering at industry events. She could see it in their eyes, the skepticism, the judgment, the subtle dismissal of her hard-earned success. One evening, she received an invitation to a high-profile gala in New York City. The event was an exclusive affair for industry heavyweights, with a private viewing of her own work as the centerpiece. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration. It was supposed to be her chance to step into the spotlight and enjoy everything she had earned. But as the date neared, Tasha felt herself freezing up. The doubts, the insecurities crept in. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people didn't actually like her work, but were only pretending out of politeness? Her assistant, Monica, noticed the change in her demeanor. Monica had been with Tasha since the early days, when Tasha's photography was still a hobby, a quiet passion she hadn't yet turned into a career. "You're thinking too much," Monica said one day, catching Tasha in one of her rare quiet moments at the office. "You've been invited to this gala because your work matters. People want to see you. You can't back down now." Tasha stared at Monica, feeling the weight of her words. She knew what Monica was saying was true, but still the voices of doubt lingered. The night of the gala arrived, and Tasha stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress. It was a dark, simple number, sleek but bold, perfect for a photographer who was known for capturing raw, unfiltered beauty. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had come this far for a reason. She had earned the right to be there. The event was being held at an exclusive art gallery in the heart of Manhattan. The moment she stepped inside, Tasha was immediately greeted by the buzz of excitement. People were standing in front of her work, admiring the photographs, talking in hushed tones about how fresh and original they were. But as she walked deeper into the crowd, she noticed something else: whispers, the kind that made her skin crawl. She caught snatches of phrases like, "I don't know about her rise," and "seems like a lucky break." It was impossible to ignore. It was everywhere. It stung, even though Tasha knew better than to care. She had worked so hard for this moment, but no matter how far she came, it was clear that people were still trying to tear her down, still trying to push her back into the shadows. The gala was an art world battleground, with critics, photographers, and artists from all over the country. And at the center of it all was her, Tasha Montgomery, whose name had been plastered across the event invitations, whose photos adorned the walls. She was the main event, but the weight of her presence felt suffocating. She was introduced to more industry giants, each handshake and forced smile reminding her of how small she had once felt. She wasn't just a photographer in their eyes. She was a curiosity, a symbol of someone who had dared to rise against the odds. But she wasn't ready for the world to treat her like an experiment. She was more than that. As the night wore on, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find none other than David standing behind her, his eyes locked onto hers. "Tasha," he said softly, as if the noise of the gala could never quite reach them. "I knew it would be you. I knew you were meant for this." For a moment, she stood frozen. The pain she had tried so hard to bury swelled up inside her. She had spent years wondering what it would feel like to hear these words from him, to have him acknowledge her. But now, standing here, they felt hollow. The man who had kept her in the dark, who had treated her like a secret, was now trying to claim a piece of her success. "I've moved on," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to break through. "I've earned this, and I don't need your validation to know I belong here." David's face flickered with surprise, but there was no apology, no remorse. Just the faint glimmer of someone who had lost control of a situation he had once felt he could dictate. Tasha turned away before he could say another word, her heart pounding in her chest. She was done. Done with his games, done with hiding in the shadows. Tonight was about her. About the person she had become, not the woman David had once kept hidden. As the night continued, Tasha found herself walking away from the whispers, away from the doubts. She walked toward the exit, her steps steady and resolute. She had stepped into the light, and now there was no going back. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. Tasha stood on the rooftop of a sleek, downtown building, the glow of Chicago's skyline stretching endlessly in front of her. The wind tugged at her hair, and the city hummed beneath her feet. But for the first time in months, the noise of the world felt distant. It was a quiet kind of triumph, one that didn't demand applause or recognition. It was the kind of victory that came from within, and she had earned every inch of it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She fished it out and saw a text from Elaine. "You're making waves, girl. The Vogue shoots next week. Don't forget who you are." Tasha smiled. Elaine had always been her rock, the one person who had seen her potential before she could even see it in herself. She typed back quickly, "I won't forget." She tucked the phone back in her pocket and leaned against the railing, gazing out at the city she had come to love and loathe in equal measure. It wasn't just the city. It was everything that had led her here. The struggle, the heartbreak, the quiet fights she had fought in the shadows. But now here she was, no longer hidden, no longer overlooked. It wasn't just the accolades that felt different this time. It was how she saw herself. For so long, she had walked through life unsure of her place, unsure of her worth. But now, every decision she made, every photo she clicked, came from a place of quiet strength. She had learned to trust herself, and that was more valuable than any magazine cover or ad campaign. The night was cool, the city lights twinkling like stars, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha felt at peace. The work she had done, the projects she had taken on, it was all building towards something even bigger. She knew it even if the rest of the world didn't. She wasn't just rising in the world of fashion photography. She was building something lasting. She didn't need the approval of the industry elites anymore. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was worthy of the space she was carving out for herself. The validation she had once craved, especially from people like David, no longer mattered. It was her own inner confidence that drove her now. And with that realization, something inside her shifted. The next day, Tasha received a call that would change everything. It was from her agent, Natalie. "Tasha, I need you to sit down for this one," Natalie said, her voice trembling with excitement. "You've been shortlisted for a major global campaign. Chanel has seen your work and they want you to shoot their next spring campaign. They've been watching your rise, and they think you're the one." Tasha's heart skipped. Chanel. The name carried so much weight, so much history. It was a brand that had been a symbol of timeless elegance, sophistication, and, most importantly, power. To be asked to shoot for Chanel, to be the one chosen to represent their vision, was an honor she had never imagined for herself. "Chanel," Tasha breathed, barely able to process the words. Are you serious? Absolutely. They're flying you to Paris next week for the initial meeting. They're already working out the details for your travel. The adrenaline hit her all at once. Paris, the city of light, the heart of fashion. For years, Tasha had dreamt of seeing herself in those hallowed spaces, among the world's most celebrated designers and photographers. And now she was about to step into that world. Her mind raced with a million thoughts. How she would be received, how her work would be judged. But as she stared at her reflection in the window, something inside her settled. She was ready. She had earned this. Paris was everything she had imagined and more. The cobblestone streets, the elegant cafes, the buildings that seemed to exude history and sophistication at every turn. Tasha couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this new, glamorous world. But she kept reminding herself that she belonged here. She had worked for this moment. The meeting with the Chanel team was nothing like she had expected. It wasn't filled with grand gestures or overwhelming praise. Instead, it was a calm, straightforward conversation about their vision for the upcoming campaign. But as Tasha sat in that sleek conference room, listening to the designers and brand representatives speak, something clicked. This was her moment. She was no longer the woman who had been overlooked. She was the one they wanted. They spoke of their desire for a fresh perspective, a new, bold vision that could blend Chanel's heritage with the contemporary world. They didn't want just another photographer who followed the rules. They wanted Tasha's unique voice, her eye for raw, emotional moments. As the meeting concluded, Tasha stood, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about fame or success. It was about creating something real, something that would make people stop and think. She wasn't just documenting the beauty around her. She was capturing truth. When she left the meeting, her mind buzzed with excitement. But she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. The Chanel campaign shoot was scheduled for the following month, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. Tasha spent every waking moment preparing, studying the brand's history, their past campaigns, and the models they had worked with. She wanted to bring something new, but she also wanted to honor the legacy of a brand that had stood the test of time. When the day of the shoot arrived, Tasha stepped into the grand Parisian mansion where the campaign would take place. The marble floors, the towering windows, the sunlight pouring in. It was a dream, but it didn't intimidate her. Not anymore. She had arrived at this point because of her own hard work, her own dedication. And today she would prove that she belonged. The models arrived, their faces glowing with excitement, and the team quickly set up. Tasha moved with quiet confidence, directing the models, adjusting the lighting, and capturing moments that were authentic and raw. She wasn't concerned with making the pictures perfect. She was more interested in capturing the feeling, the story, the emotion behind each shot. As the day went on, Tasha felt the pressure of the moment lifting. She had created something beautiful, something that was all her own. And when the shoot was over, and the team gathered to review the images, Tasha saw something in their faces that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just approval. It was awe. Truly stunning. The head designer remarked, his voice full of admiration. You've captured the soul of Chanel in a way no one else has. Tasha smiled, the weight of his words sinking in. This was her triumph, not just because she had worked with a legendary brand, but because she had done it on her own terms. She had proven to herself that she wasn't just another photographer. She was an artist. A few weeks later, the campaign went live. The images graced the walls of Chanel boutiques around the world, and the advertisements filled every major fashion magazine. Tasha's name was now synonymous with elegance and power, a force in the fashion world that couldn't be ignored. But the quiet victory, the peace that had settled inside her, was what mattered most. She had walked through the fire, endured the doubts and criticisms, and come out the other side stronger than ever. She was no longer looking for external validation. She had found her worth within herself. As she stood in front of the mirror once more, looking at the woman staring back at her, she saw someone she had never fully recognized before. a woman who had fought for every inch of success, who had built her career from the ground up. And, in that reflection, she saw someone who was just getting started. The world could see her now, and nothing would ever make her invisible again. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. Tasha hadn't been back to Chicago in months. But when the call came from her old mentor, Greg, asking if she could come back to speak at a photography panel for a major event in the city, she knew she couldn't refuse. Chicago had always been home. Her home, before the lights of Paris, the billboards, and the glitz of the fashion world had drawn her away. Before the Prada campaigns and Chanel shoots, Chicago had been where she learned to hold her camera, where she had found her passion for capturing the truth in every image. The city had changed a little since she'd left. There were new businesses, new faces, but the energy of the streets, the unrelenting pace of the city, none of it had shifted. It was still the place she had built herself from the ground up, the place that had never fully accepted her, but still it was where she had begun. She arrived at the event that evening, stepping into a room filled with aspiring photographers, industry veterans, and critics. It was everything she had once dreamed of, and now it felt different. The crowd was eager, but there was a hesitance in their eyes as they saw her walk in. She could feel the judgment lingering in the air. She wasn't just a guest speaker. She was the woman who had taken the fashion world by storm, the one who was supposed to be untouchable. But Tasha had long learned that fame wasn't the same as peace. The panel was set up on a stage, the lights dimmed to create a more intimate atmosphere. Tasha sat at the far end of the table, her eyes scanning the crowd. There were whispers, quick glances. She had made it, yes, but not everyone was thrilled about it. The skepticism in the air was palpable. They saw her as an outsider, a woman who had bypassed the years of struggle they were still experiencing. They saw her success as something that had come too quickly, too easily. Greg introduced the panelists, and the room settled into an expectant silence. Tasha watched the faces in the audience. Young photographers still struggling to make names for themselves, seasoned professionals who had worked for decades to earn their place, and critics who were just waiting for an opportunity to tear someone down. The conversation began with questions about the challenges of breaking into the industry. The moderator asked, "Tasha, you've had an incredible rise in the fashion world, but do you feel like you had to prove yourself, given the perception that you were discovered quickly?" The question struck a nerve. Tasha had heard it before. The insinuation that her success had been handed to her, that it hadn't been earned, had followed her everywhere. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question and the eyes on her. "I recognize that my journey hasn't been the same as others. It's been different, yes, but not easy. It took a long time for me to believe I was worthy of this success." The room fell silent for a moment, and Tasha could feel the shift. She wasn't defending herself. She was simply speaking the truth. The women and men in the room, who had all struggled in their own way, were listening. One woman in the audience raised her hand, and Tasha turned to meet her eyes. "You've been labeled an overnight success. How do you handle the pressure of that label?" Tasha paused for a moment before responding, her voice softening. "I've always thought that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of 1,000 quiet decisions, small moments that lead you to where you are. People see the final product, but they don't see the years of rejection, the nights spent working on something that no one noticed. So, when people tell me it was easy, I know they haven't seen the full picture." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I've struggled with the idea of success coming too fast. It's hard to believe you deserve it." "Exactly," Tasha said. "That's been my biggest challenge. The moment I started to believe in myself was the moment everything changed. But that doesn't mean the doubt ever goes away. The difference now is that I don't let it control me. I use it to push me forward." The conversation continued, and Tasha found herself answering more questions, speaking about her journey, her early years of working tirelessly for little recognition, the rejection, the heartache, and then the slow but steady climb. It wasn't easy. It never had been. But that was what made the success so sweet. The struggle wasn't an obstacle. It was part of the process. As the panel ended and the audience began to disperse, Tasha stood, feeling the weight of the experience. It wasn't the applause or the attention she craved. It was the respect, the understanding, the shared humanity between her and those who had struggled in the same way. They weren't all critics or fans. They were people who had walked their own paths, people who understood what it meant to fight for a dream. As Tasha stepped off the stage, she was greeted by a young woman who looked no older than 20, her eyes filled with admiration. "Tasha, I just wanted to say that your story means so much to me. I've been struggling with doubt for years, and hearing you speak tonight, I don't know, it just gave me hope." Tasha smiled, feeling the sincerity in the young woman's words. "It's not easy," she said, "but it's worth it. Keep pushing forward. You'll get there." The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." As Tasha walked out of the venue, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't the woman who had been rejected or overlooked. She wasn't the woman hiding behind someone else's success. She was the woman who had faced her doubts, her fears, and her critics, and she had come out on top. In the days that followed, Tasha continued to work on her next projects with renewed energy. But something had shifted inside her. The need for validation, for recognition, had faded. She no longer sought to prove herself to others. She had already proven everything to herself. She was doing it. She was creating work that mattered. And that was all that mattered. A few weeks later, Tasha received a phone call she had never expected. It was David. She had been avoiding his messages for months, but something about this call felt different. "Hey, Tasha," he said, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, and I just want to say that I'm proud of you. You've done things I never thought you could do. You've become someone I didn't think you could become." Tasha didn't know how to respond. The old part of her, the part that had craved his approval, that had waited for his acknowledgement, wanted to say something. But the new part of her, the one who had learned to trust herself, knew there was nothing left to say. "I don't need your approval anymore, David," Tasha replied softly. "I've learned to believe in myself, and that's all that matters." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. And then, David spoke again, this time with a quiet humility. "I get it. I'm sorry. You were always more than I gave you credit for." Tasha smiled, but there was no bitterness, no anger in her heart. She had moved on. She had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for hers. She had learned to let go. "I hope you find what you're looking for, David," she said, her voice calm. "But I'm not part of that anymore." The call ended shortly after that. Tasha didn't feel angry, didn't feel like she had to explain herself. The person who had kept her in the shadows for so long was no longer a part of her life. She had found her own light. And in that light, Tasha had found redemption, not through anyone else's validation, but through her own journey of self-discovery. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. The morning air was crisp as Tasha stepped out onto the balcony of her penthouse apartment, the sun rising over Chicago's skyline. The city, which had once seemed so big, so overwhelming, now felt like home. She was no longer a part of the shadows, no longer hidden behind the scenes. Her name was known in the industry, her work admired, and more than anything, she had become the woman she had always dreamed of being. Confident, powerful, unapologetically real. But the journey had never been easy. It had been full of twists and turns, betrayals and triumphs. She had faced doubts from the world, but it had always been her own self-doubt that had been the hardest to overcome. For years, she had listened to the voices telling her she wasn't enough, that she needed to prove herself, that she wasn't worthy of the space she occupied. But now, as she looked out at the city, at the people who walked its streets, at the lights that flickered in the distance, Tasha understood that she had never needed anyone's validation. She had always been enough. She had always been worthy of every success, every opportunity, and every moment of joy that came her way. And now, with a new sense of clarity, She was ready to take the next step in her journey. There was a new project on the horizon, one that would take her to new heights, beyond the boundaries of fashion photography. But this time, it wasn't just about work. It was about legacy. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Greg, her mentor, the one person who had believed in her before anyone else. He had been there when she was just starting out, when her portfolio was filled with raw, unrefined images. He had seen the potential in her before she had seen it in herself. "Tasha, I need to speak with you. There's a new opportunity, and it's right up your alley. Call me when you can." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before. Opportunity right up your alley, but they had always been followed by a series of complicated steps, negotiations, and decisions. She had learned to navigate the uncertainty, but this felt different. She felt like she was on the edge of something bigger, something more meaningful. She called Greg immediately, her pulse quickening as the phone rang. "Greg, hey, what's up?" "Tasha, I've been watching you," Greg said, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "You've come a long way, and I'm proud of you. But I think it's time for you to make your next move. There's an opportunity for you to collaborate on a documentary project with one of the most renowned filmmakers in the world. They want you to capture not just the surface of fashion, but the soul of it, what it means to create, to disrupt, to innovate." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. A documentary? She had always wanted to explore storytelling beyond the lens of a camera, but a project like this was an entirely new direction. A chance to change the narrative, to tell the stories that needed to be told, not just the polished, curated versions the world often saw. "Tell me more," she said, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. "They've been following your work for a while," Greg continued. "They want you to work with them on a series that delves into the untold stories of the fashion world. The struggles, the passion, the risk. They want you to be the one to capture the heart of the industry, the part that no one sees. And they want you to direct it, too. This isn't just about photography. It's about creating something that will change how people see this world." Tasha's heart raced. This was the kind of project she had always wanted, the kind that would let her tell a deeper story, a more authentic one. It wasn't about the surface anymore, the glamorous facade of fashion. It was about the raw, the real, the human side of it, the sacrifices, the struggles, and the triumphs that no one ever saw. "I'm in," Tasha said, her voice full of conviction. "Let's do it." The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation. Tasha worked tirelessly with the documentary team, planning every detail, every shot. They traveled to remote fashion ateliers in Europe, capturing the artisans who spent years perfecting their craft, to bustling streets in New York, where designers came together in chaotic harmony to create new trends. They went behind the scenes at high-profile shows, filming models, stylists, and designers as they worked, capturing the raw energy that fueled the fashion industry. Tasha was no longer just the woman behind the lens. She was shaping the story, guiding the narrative. She had always been told that her work was about capturing beauty, but this project was different. It was about capturing truth. It was about showing the world something deeper, something that wasn't polished or perfect. It was about authenticity. The documentary was a revelation. It wasn't just another superficial glimpse into the fashion world. It was a story about creation, about art, about the risks people took to make their dreams a reality. And as the project came together, Tasha realized that it wasn't just her work that had transformed. It was her as a person. She had stepped into her power in ways she never expected, shedding the doubts and insecurities that had once held her back. She had created her own space in the world, not by waiting for permission or validation, but by taking risks and creating the opportunities she wanted. She had built something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. The premiere of the documentary was held in Los Angeles, and Tasha stood in front of the theater, her heart racing as she watched the red carpet event unfold before her. The film industry was a new world for her, but it felt like the natural next step. This was her chance to leave a legacy, not just as a photographer, but as someone who had captured the essence of an entire industry, someone who had told the untold stories and shared the raw, unfiltered truth. As she entered the theater, the lights dimmed, and the film began. Tasha sat back in her seat, her breath caught in her chest, as she watched the world she had created come to life on the screen. The faces of the people who had poured their hearts into the fashion world filled the screen, their stories woven together in a tapestry of passion, creativity, and perseverance. The emotions that had fueled the project, the struggles, the moments of doubt, the quiet victories, shone through in every frame. As the film ended and the credits rolled, the audience rose to their feet, applauding. Tasha sat there for a moment, a tear slipping down her cheek, as the weight of it all hit her. This wasn't just a career milestone. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. This was her legacy. The applause seemed to go on forever, but it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the feeling of knowing that she had created something meaningful, something that would be remembered for years to come. She had used her voice to tell the stories that needed to be heard, and she had done it on her own terms. When she stood up to leave the theater, she was met with a sea of congratulations. People surrounded her, praising the film, praising her work. But for the first time in her life, Tasha didn't need anyone else's validation. She knew what she had done. She knew the journey it had taken to get there, and she was proud of herself. As she walked out of the theater and into the cool night air, she looked up at the stars above. The world was vast, but it no longer felt intimidating. She had carved out her place in it, and nothing would ever take that away from her. Tasha Montgomery had risen, and she wasn't going anywhere. If the story touched something in you, share your city in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels.